Hi, I'm Samantha McDouglas from thebridgeteachers.com. Come look over my shoulder at a play problem. On this hand, East was the dealer and passed. Our hand opened one spade, showing 5 or more spades and an opening hand or better. West now bid 2 spades. This was Michael's, showing 5 hearts and 5 cards in an unknown minor. The point ranges on Michael can be very different depending on partnership agreements, so if you care, you should ask. Our partner passed, and East bid 3 diamonds. This is probably an error. If East wanted to play in West's minor, they should have bid 2 no trump rather than bidding one of the minors. Because of that, I would assume that 3 diamonds is actually a very long diamond suit. It would be weird for East to make this bid knowing that their partner has 5 cards in hearts and probably clubs, but that's what East bid. Our hand now bid 3 spades, and West doubled. This bid is also unclear. I would suggest that this bid does tend to look like penalty, because if West wanted East to choose one of their suits, they would have been better off bidding their minor. However, it's unusual for a hand that bid Michael's to make a penalty double, especially at the 3 level, so again, this bid is a little odd. Your opponents are going to make mistakes. You are going to make mistakes. Bridge is a game of mistakes. The question is always, what do we do after that? Well, after West doubled, everyone passed. West was on lead and led the ace of clubs. Now, even though your opponent is winning this trick, you can still pause and assess the hand. And I would recommend coming up with as complete of a plan as you can before you ever play a card. We are, however, going to play through the first 5 tricks, and then we're going to assess the hand. Declare played the 2, East played the 7, and our hand played the 3. West now cashed the king of clubs, with everyone following. And now the ace of hearts, with everyone following again. And now led the queen of diamonds. Clara followed suit from dummy. Their partner played the 3, and we played the ace. The person who held our hand now led the ace of spades. The king fell, and East played a spade. Now we are going to take a moment to assess the hand. In a trump contract, we assess the hand by counting losers. We always count the hand with a longer trump, so we're going to be counting the south hand. How many losers does the south hand have? 1. The 7 of hearts. We don't have any clubs, we don't have any diamonds, so we don't have any club or diamond losers, and our spades are all good. Now the opponents do have trump, so we do need to be mindful of that, because as long as the opponents have trump, they have the potential to take a trick with it. But because our trump are all high, I would not count a spade loser. Are we making this hand? Yes, absolutely. We've lost 3 tricks. We have 1 more loser. We can afford 4 tricks, so we are making this doubled contract. But you must always remember that the more tricks you take, the more points you get, especially doubled. In bridge, almost all of our decisions are based on an analysis of the risk versus the reward. So when we think about, are we just going to draw trump and make this contract, or are we going to try for an over trick, our process begins with what is the risk for trying to make an over trick and what is the reward. The reward is an over trick. An over trick, in the grand scheme of things, is generally a fairly small reward. However, when you're playing match points, it can be the difference between a very good score and a very bad score. On top of it, this contract is doubled, which means that this over trick is worth a lot more than a normal over trick would be worth. And on top of that, there is the psychological effect of taking an over trick in a doubled contract. This can give you a leg up on the rest of the hands. Before we just go off and try and take that over trick, let's assess the risk. In order to assess the risk, we have to establish what our plan would be to get rid of our loser. How would we avoid losing a trick with the 7 of hearts? We could trump it. Let's talk about the trump. How many trump do the opponents have? They have 2. How do you think they're splitting? They are probably both in the east hand. Why do I say that? Because when we led the ace, West played the king. Playing the king would be an error if West had any little spades. If they had little spades, they would have played a little spade, not the king. This means that both of the remaining little spades are almost certainly in the east hand. In order to draw trump, we would need to pull how many more rounds of trump? 2. If we draw trump, will we be able to trump the 7 of hearts? No. If you pull 2 rounds of trump, you won't have any trump left in dummy, and you will almost certainly lose a trick with the 7 of hearts. So here's where we evaluate the risk. We are now talking about not drawing all of the trump right now, and instead trumping a card while the opponents still have trump. When you think about how risky it would be to trump the 7 of hearts, what do you think? There is 0 risk. Why would I say that? Because we can trump high and then pull the trump all without ever giving East a chance to win the trick. When you think about trumping high, the very first thing that you want to ask yourself is it going to cost me to trump high? Will it here? No. Trumping high can cost you if when you trump high, you promote one of the opponent's trump. In this case, what 2 trump does East have? The 7 and the 3. If we trump high, will we be promoting the 7? In other words, will East be able to take a trick with the 7? No. We have the queen, the jack, the 10, the 9, and the 8. We can actually afford to trump high multiple times and still have trump high enough to pull both the 7 and the 3 without cost. Because we can afford to trump high, there is 0 chance that East, even if they are out of hearts right now, will be able to take a trick because they won't be able to beat the jack. Now, that step in and of itself is not quite enough. You know you're going to leave the 7 of hearts and play the jack of spades. But what are we going to do after that? Because now we're going to be in dummy. So after we trump the 7 of hearts, what do we do next? We lead our remaining trump, the 5 of spades, back to our hand, pull all of East's trump, and claim because our hand is good. It's important to think all of the steps through, because if you just think the first step through, you might find yourself in the wrong hand, unable to pull trump, and now leading something that East can trump. But in this case, we can simply lead the 7 of hearts, trump high. Even if East is out, they cannot beat the jack. They have the 7 and the 3. They can't beat the jack. So this is perfectly safe. As it turns out, they do have another heart. Now we can cross back to our hand. It's very important to have considered this step ahead of time. Draw the remaining trump and claim because our hand is good and the opponents are out of trump. Let's go back and look at all 4 hands. When you make a decision in bridge, the things you're going to think about is what is the risk for this line of play and what is the reward? In other words, is it worth it? Because when you take a risk, and you're always having to take risks in bridge, But when you take a risk, you want to make sure that the reward is worth the risk. Because if the reward isn't worth the risk, you don't want to take the risk. But on this hand, when we evaluate the risk versus the reward, it doesn't matter how good the reward is because there is no risk. When you can trump high and it doesn't cost you, you're not taking any risk. When we lead the 7, there is nothing that the opponents can do to stop the jack from winning this trick. And because we have another spade in dummy, we can just lead the 5, pull the trump, and our hand becomes good. But we have multiple avenues to come back to our hand, get rid of this trump, and claim. When there is 0 risk to get a very nice overtrick, there is absolutely no reason to not do so. Thank you. Whether you're traveling or staying at home, be sure to keep your bridge brain engaged. Like and subscribe for more hands and insights.